Hello, my dear listener. Where in the world are you tonight? What hour drifts around you? Now, morning, evening, or something between dreams and dawn, wherever you are, I invite you to close your eyes and feel the breath of the ancient steppe brushing against your skin. Hello, my dear listener. Where are you tonight? And what time is it where you are? Is the wind gentle where you rest? Can you hear the hush of distant plains, or the sigh of a sky that never ends? If you close your eyes, I will take you there, to the far, endless lands where the earth is silver with frost and the stars hang low, to the steppe that cradled my life and whispered my name long before any empire knew it. My name is Tomyris, queen of the Massagete, daughter of the sky and the wandering wind. But before I was a queen, I was only a child of the plains, barefoot on frozen grass, chasing the breath of horses and the laughter of my people. They say the wind remembers everything, and if you listen long enough, it carries the stories of those who were never meant to be forgotten. Tonight, that same wind has come for me. It brushes against my tent, trampling the hide walls like the pulse of memory. It asks that I speak not as a conqueror, nor as the slayer of kings, but as a woman who once loved and lost, and learned that even freedom has its cost. I have heard that in your world my name is spoken with awe and blood, that they remember me only for the man I destroyed. But I wish to tell you the rest of it. The silence before the storm, the scent of the cold dawn, the heartbeat of my son, the cry of my horse beneath a sky of steel. So come closer, wanderer of the modern night. Let the sound of my voice carry you across centuries, over snow and wind and forgotten bones. Let me tell you how it was. When the steppe was my cradle, my kingdom, and my grave, I was born beneath a sky that never ends. No walls, no marble, no cities, only wind, horizon, and silence. The first sound I remember was the soft beating of hooves, the rhythm of 100 horses moving through dawn mist like living thunder. My mother said the sky was our ancestor. She told me that every cloud carried the spirits of those who had died free, and that when we looked upward, we were looking into the eyes of our own blood. The steppe was our cradle and our grave, its cold breath seeping into our bones until we could no longer tell where we ended and the earth began. In the long winters, when frost painted our tents with white lace, I would sit beside the fire and listen to the old women sing. Their voices were cracked but strong, singing of the wolf mothers who nursed the first warriors, of the wind that never bowed to any king, of women who fought beside their men, and sometimes above them. Those songs became the pulse of my heart. I learned to ride before I could write my name. Our horses were not beasts of burden, they were kin. Their breath steamed in the cold air like prayers, and when I pressed my cheek against a horse's neck, I felt the heartbeat of the steppe itself. Each gallop was a hymn to freedom. Each arrow loosed a promise that no chain would ever touch us. My father was a quiet man, his face carved by wind and time. He taught me how to draw a bow, how to listen for the shift of grass when an enemy crawled near, how to sleep with one ear open and one hand on the hilt of a blade. But it was my mother who taught me patience, how to wait for the wind to change, how to see omens in the flight of birds and the color of the dawn. She said a queen must not only be fierce but still as snow before a storm. There were no temples in our land, only the open sky and the endless chant of the elements. At night, the stars glittered like 1,000 eyes watching us, and I would lie awake in the frost, imagining that they were the spirits of forgotten queens, women who had once ruled the world of men and left no monument behind but the wind. Sometimes I wonder if one of those stars was mine, even then, waiting, watching, patient as destiny itself. I was not yet a queen. I was only a girl with frost on her eyelashes and smoke in her hair, learning that the world can be both vast and lonely. But deep inside, something ancient stirred, a knowing, a whisper that one day I would carry the voice of my people, and that the sky, endless and indifferent, would remember my name. The seasons in the steppe did not change gently. They arrived like armies. Winter came with the teeth of wolves, and summer returned with dust and light so sharp it could blind you. Between them, spring and autumn were brief visitors, whispering through the grass, reminding us that nothing ever truly stayed. By the time I reached my 16th winter, I could outshoot most of the men in our camp. My arms had hardened from the bowstring. My hair, once soft and dark, had grown long and sun-bleached, carrying the scent of smoke, leather, and wind. When I rode, the world seemed to open for me, the horizon rolling back like a curtain of light. I remember thinking then that the sky itself recognized me, that the wind whispered my name, not as a child, but as one of its own. Our tribe, the Misagite, lived as our ancestors had, never bound by walls or cities, never tamed by kings. We moved with the herds, our lives stitched to the rhythm of grass and storm. Every morning, I would wake to the sound of horses snorting in the frost, the clang of bronze cups, and the smell of fermented mare's milk warming by the fire. The women laughed as they worked, their hands strung from weaving saddles and mending armor. They were warriors too. In our world, the line between man and woman was drawn not by gender, but by courage. It was during one of those winters that I first saw Spargopyses, the man who would one day be my husband. He was the son of a neighboring chief, a rider whose presence bent the air around him like heat. His hair was the color of burnt straw, his eyes the pale blue of distant snow. When he smiled, it was not often, but when he did, it felt as though the frozen earth beneath us might thaw. He came to our camp with his father's warriors, bringing gifts of salted fish and iron blades. I watched him from afar, pretending not to care, but my heart betrayed me with every breath. I had known men who boasted of their hunts and scars, but he was different, silent, observant, the kind of strength that doesn't shout but waits. That spring, when the grass returned and the mare's fold, our tribes joined in alliance through marriage. There was no temple, no priest, only the vast blue of the sky and the steady gaze of our people. We stood side by side before the wind, our hands bound with a strip of horse hide, and the shaman scattered ashes into the air, saying, "As the smoke rises, so shall your souls travel together." I remember the warmth of his hand in mine, the tremor of something sacred, not a ceremony, but a promise. The drums echoed across the plain, and I felt the rhythm of life itself vibrating through the soil. That night, as the fires burned low, I lay beside him beneath the wide, sleepless stars, and for the first time, I understood that love can be both wild and still, a river that flows without ever asking where it ends. For many seasons, we rode together, our laughter carried by the wind. He would call me my hawk, and I would tease him, saying he was too gentle for a warrior. But in the quiet hours, when the camp slept, I would feel his arm around me and think, perhaps this is what peace feels like. Perhaps the gods had chosen to spare us from the hunger of history, but the gods of the steppe are not kind for long. Peace to them is merely the stillness before the storm. It was during one of our hunts. The sky dimmed with the wings of migrating geese. That word came from the east. Strangers crossing the Oxus River, bearing banners of the Empire of Persia. Their horses wore bronze masks, and their soldiers marched with the precision of iron. Among them rode messengers, their tongues heavy with promises of alliance and threats of obedience. Spagapises returned from council with a shadow on his face. I asked him what the strangers wanted. He said, "They come with gold in one hand and chains in the other." Ah, I knew then that the horizon of our freedom had begun to narrow. Even the wind seemed to grow colder, as though it too sensed a storm rising beyond the edge of the world. That winter, when the frost was deepest, he rode away with his warriors to guard the borderlands. I waited. I prayed. The nights grew long, and the fires dimmed. Every morning, I would listen for the sound of returning hooves, but the plains stayed silent. When they brought him back, it was not his laughter that came first, but the wail of his mother. He had fallen in battle against an army that fought not for land, but for empire. His armor was torn, his face still calm, as if he were only asleep. The wind howled through the camp that day, ripping the smoke from our fires, as though the sky itself mourned him. I did not weep. I could not. The tears froze before they could fall. In that silence, I felt something awaken. A cold fire, a resolve forged from the marrow of my ancestors. If I was to live, I would live not as a widow, but as a queen. If I was to speak, my voice would be the voice of every woman who had ever watched her beloved ride away into the snow. They buried him where the land met the river, beneath a cairn of stones marked with the sigil of our tribe. The shaman said his spirit had joined the wind. That night, the storm broke, and as the thunder rolled across the steppe, I thought I heard his voice whisper through the rain, "Life, my hawk, life fiercely." From that moment, I knew I would, and the steppe silent and vast, listened. The winter after my husband's cairn was raised, I learned what silence is made of. It is not emptiness. It is fiber sinew, a woven rope that either strangles or steadies you, depending on how you hold it. I rose before dawn, when the cold had teeth, and the stars still lingered like embers in the blue. I saddled my mare in the hush palm along her neck, breath clouding the air, and watched the camp drowse beneath snow-hatted tents. Grief is heavy, but a saddle is heavier, and it taught my body to carry weight. Men watched me the way wolves watch a fire, cautious, resentful, compelled. Some said a woman could not rule the Massacete. Others said a widow must go to her husband's brother, must be folded back into a man's custody, the way a cloak is folded after a journey. But I had not been born for folding. In me, the old songs had been seeded. In me, wind had made a home. On the first day of council, I entered the circle of chiefs without veil or escort. The fire in the center licked at a low iron tripod, sending up sparks that tangled in the dawn. Around it stood men with faces carved by winter scar-latticed, beard-furred, eyes like flint chips. I wore my wolfskin mantle and no crown. Only a strip of horse hide bound my wrist, the same hide that had bound my hand to my husband's on the day we promised our souls to travel together. Tomyris, said Arsamis, the elder whose voice carried like a falling axe. We come to divide the herds and choose a new war chief. The steppes will not wait. The steppe never waits, I answered, but it does remember. And it remembers that I kept pace with your sons before they had beards. A ripple of breath moved through them. I took a step closer to the fire, letting its heat rise into my ribs. Give me the right to lead a winter hunt. If I fail to return with meat enough for every tent, I will never ask your ears for my words again. Men of the plains understand wagers better than sermons. A hunt is not politics. It is proof. The sky that day was the color of raw steel. We rode into it with bows unstrung across our backs, lances upright, and a hush in our throats. The snow held the tracks like scripture. Far ahead, a herd of elk moved across the whiteness, their breath pluming, their hooves writing brief, dark verses in the frost. I signaled with 2 fingers split and surround, and my riders peeled off like flung knives. A young warrior named Rusta, who had never yet failed to grin at danger, looked to me for the cue. Do not chase, I murmured. Shepherd, we will make the herd choose our jaws. We moved them slow, patient, curving them toward a wind-carved ravine where the drifts lay deep. When the elk broke, we broke with them, not frenzy, but timing arrows unbent and singing, the ancient song of bowstring and breath. I loosed 3 and dropped 2. Rusta took one at the neck, the others fell to the wider circle's calm geometry. No waste, no bloodlust. When the last cry dimmed into the hush of snow, I raised my hand not to signal victory, but to ask the wind to carry thanks. By night, the campfires wore a collar of meat, and the children dirtied their smiles with grease. An old woman pressed her fingers to my sleeve and said, Your mother sang true. When morning returned, the chiefs did too. They asked for a second proof not of hunting, but of warcraft. A neighboring band had taken more than water rights from our wintering ground. They had lifted horses in the night and struck a herdsman down when he called after them. We are not a people built for courts. We are a people built for balances. At dawn we rode a small party, not to crush but to reclaim. I took only those who knew how to move without sound. Men and women whose mouths could be still and whose eyes could find a trail where wind had tried to erase it. By noon we had traced the thieves to a shallow valley tufted with winter grass. Their horses were tethered near a line of scrub. Their guard slept with his back against a stone, as if stone could keep watch. I did not order a rush. I ordered breath. Count 4. I whispered, and take the ropes. We moved like weather, not bodies, but a pressure that arrives and is suddenly everywhere. Within moments, we had the horses free and the sleeping guard waking into the fact of our circle. He reached for a blade and found only his own reflection in my spearhead. Why do you come with theft? I asked, when you could have come with barter. He said, because hunger teaches the shortest path. I told him that hunger can also teach the longest winter. We will take back what is ours. We will leave you with what is yours. If you cross our herds again, the wind will carry your names to me, and I will answer. He did not speak of mercy, neither did I. We are a people whose treaties are made of eyes, not ink. When we returned, the council fire did not crackle so loudly. Our Samus kept his axe voice folded inside his chest for a long while, and then he said, the tribe needs a war chief who can be both winter and spring. The tribe needs a queen who knows the sound of horses and of hunger. He drew a strip of silver from his cloak thin as a crescent of frozen moonlight and placed it on my wrist where the horse hide had been. No crown, a circlet for the hand that would hold the range. That night I stood alone outside my tent and looked up at the pitted lanterns of the sky. I thought of my husband, the warmth of his palm, the hush of his breath at my ear, and of the road that had opened at my feet the moment the earth closed over his bones. Watch me. I told the stars, witness me. I told the wind, if I must be iron, let me be iron that remembers water. Power is a slow animal. It does not leap, it leans. Over the next seasons, I learned the lean of it, how to listen longer than I spoke, how to let silence answer insults, how to keep my hands open so that people could place their trust into them without feeling forced. I visited every family, ate their bread, drank their bitter mare's milk, praised their children's seats and their elders' stories. A queen on the steppe does not sit above, she sits beside. I became fluent in the secret language of weariness, the curve of a mother's back as she lifts a water skin, the way a boy's shoulders square when you ask him to run a message at night. I learned each mare's temper and each chief's. I learned to turn my grief from weight into width, a breath big enough for others to lean against. In spring, I instituted a new rite. It was not a law, for we do not hang our lives on laws. It was a song, and people picked it up because it fit their mouths. Each new warrior, male or female, would ride the perimeter of our herds at dusk, alone, unarmed, trusting the tribe to be their weapon. When they returned, the old women would wash their feet with snow and ash, and the young would bring them broth. Thus we taught them, from the first day, that courage is not a solo fire, but a chain of warmth passed hand to hand. Thus we taught them that a queen's task is not to be the sharpest spear, but the surest circle. Word of us traveled farther than our riders. It traveled on the mouths of traitors, and the bitterness of men refused our water. It traveled into tents where maps were drawn, not with bones and pebbles, but with ink and decree. In those tents sat a king whose shadow laid claim to horizons. He had a name that ran like hammer gold, Cyrus. Before he came, his messengers did 3 times, each with gifts, each with a different flavor of promise. The first brought silks and said, alliance. The second brought blades and said, protection. The third brought honeyed wine and said, marriage. I received them not as a supplicant, but as a host. I let them sit beneath my tent's open flap and watch the width of our sky. I had them taste our milk and our meat, and learn with polite discomfort the patience of wind. When the third messenger, a man with oiled beard and clever eyes, spoke the word marriage, the firelight bothered his face, revealing a seam where flattery had been stitched to command. Marriage is a joining of journeys, I said. Which journey would end for mine to begin? None would end, he answered, smiling. They would merge under a greater star. And who chooses the star? I asked. He did not say Cyrus. He said destiny. Men in palaces often confuse the two. I did not throw him out. I did not raise my voice. I poured wine into his cup and watched the red fold itself into the metal like a foretelling. You will tell your king, I said, that the Massagetae do not trade their horizons for halls. You will tell him that I am already wed to my people and their wind. Tell him he may bring his banners to our borders, and we will feed his ambassadors as we feed our elders. But if he steps beyond that to take what is not his, the steppe will teach him its language, and he will not like the taste. He left with a long bow and a pouch of salt, as gifts as courtesy demands between those who may become enemies. After he left, I stood beneath the grey-blue dome of dusk and let my hair loose. It fell like a river down my back, heavy with smoke and winter. I felt my son's heartbeat in memory. I felt my husband's breath in the cold. Somewhere to the south, a man with an empire had heard my name, and the shape of his sleep was changing. Somewhere to the east, the Oxus was making its slow, iron-colored promises. That night, the wind rode across the steppe in a script only we read. I lay awake and practiced stillness, the kind my mother had taught me. Stillness that is not the absence of motion, but its governor. If a storm were coming, I would not run to meet it, nor would I block my door. I would open the flap and let it pass through, and I would still be standing when it was gone. They said he was the King of Kings, the lawgiver, a man whose armies marched in lines as straight as the edges of a blade. They said his cities shone, his roads were smooth as river stones, his rule a net that could catch even the wind. Men who have lived under roofs always believe the wind can be caught. His herald came in summer, when the grass was tall, and lambs distracted the children from their chores. The man wore a cloak of scarlet, so red it bruised the eye. His belt was hammered with small gold animals, each one perfect and smug. He dismounted as if he did me a favor by touching the earth. Queen Tomyris, he proclaimed, voice trained to carry through courtyards and over colonnades. I come bearing the friendship of Cyrus, king of Persia, whose fame embraces the world. He offers alliance by sacred bond. He offers peace sealed with marriage. He offers water? I asked, and handed him a cup. He hesitated, then drank, and winced at the bite of it. Our water is honest, with a little iron in its mouth. He spoke at length about borders and glory, about folding our people into a civilization so large we would never again need to fear winter. As he spoke, the breeze toyed with his scarlet hem. Dust kissed the gold beasts on his belt until they looked less proud. Your king is welcome to our fires as a guest, I said, but we live without walls. We marry the wind. If he seeks to clasp our wrists with law, he will find we turn to weather. The herald smiled with careful pity, the way men from cities smile at the idea of hunger being a teacher. Majesty, he said, freedom is sweeter under a great umbrella, and rain is more honest under the open sky, I answered. There was no anger, not yet, only geometry, two shapes discovering they cannot occupy the same ground. He left with courtesy coiled tightly in his posture, like a snake kept in a basket. I convened my council. Around the central fire, chiefs stamped warmth back into their feet, and women passed bowls of broth whose steam made ghosts of us. We spoke of rivers and crossings, of the places where the land chose to pinch and therefore to make war easy. We spoke of hunters gone missing near the Oxus, of traders who said the Persian camps at the far bank gleamed with armor like fish in a net. I sent riders to the east. I sent gifts to the north and south. Smoked meat, salt, woven hides, reminders that our web was wider than any map could guess. At night I climbed the low ridge beyond the camp and watched lightning argue with the horizon. In its brief letters of fire, I read what I already knew. He would come. He came not with himself at first, but with a banquet. On the far side of the Oxus, his men raised tents stitched with silk. They set tables under awnings and laid out wine jugs whose bellies were heavier than a man's head. They invited one of our bands, not the main camp, but the free riders, the ones who liked a song more than a council, to taste Persian honey. They gave them meat glazed with fig, bread soft as a child's cheek, wine that loosened the spine into smiling. By morning, half the free riders were sleeping like stones. By noon, they were bound. The man who sent word rode his mare until her sides were white with salt. When he dismounted in our camp, he could not speak for a moment. His mouth worked around the size of the truth. They took them, he said at last, sleeping like lambs. They crossed them over the river. They carry your son's name in their mouths. My blood, for a heartbeat, forgot how to move. Not fear something colder, a stillness that begins at the core and pushes outward until the world looks like it has been left out in frost. Who? I asked, though I already knew. Spagappies, he said. They have him. The wind tipped the edge of my tent just then. A small, ordinary motion that made all the air around us roar. The mare he had ridden lowered her head and breathed harshly, as if she too understood. I did not scream. I did not fold. I put my hand on the messenger's shoulder. A boy barely and felt the tremor there. Eat, I told him, because a body must be told to live while the spirit is deciding. Drink, then saddle. Within an hour the camp was alone, women tightening straps, men bundling arrows, children running messages in their nimble feet. I walked through them and borrowed their steadiness the way a woman borrows coals from her neighbor's fire. When I reached my tent's pole, I looked up. The sky was a pale iron dish, the sun a coin fallen face down. Mother, I whispered to the wind that had taught me stillness, lend me your winter. I bound my hair. I buckled the silver circlet at my wrist. I took the spear that had belonged to my husband and the bow that had always belonged to me. Then I stepped into the braid of my people and felt us become a single rope. We rode east toward the river that believed it could divide us from ourselves. We reached the oxes at dusk, a long iron ribbon muttering to itself, flecked with floating skins of light, where the sky poured its last silver into the current. On the far bank, Persian tents like white teeth, banners breathing slowly, watchfires set in clean rows, as if flame could be tamed by geometry. In the near dark, the river made us two worlds. But a river is only a road that forgot its manners. I rode to the water's edge and lifted my spear, its iron catching the last ash blue of the day. Cyrus, I called across the slow thunder. I am Tomyris, queen of the Massagetæ. Give me back what is mine. Echoes stitched my words to the opposite shore. For a time, only the river answered, carrying its cold old stories to nowhere. Then a lantern moved, then another, a narrow procession along the river walk. A figure stopped where the bank sloped down into the dark, and a voice came smooth and trained, like leather pulled across a stone. Majesty, the voice said, I am Harpagus, general to Cyrus, king of the lands where roads are younger than his will. I speak for him now. Then listen for him later, I answered. Bring my son. They brought him, bound, but walking. My boy, my arrow, my hawk, Spargappises. Lantern light slicked his hair to his brow. A welt bloomed at his temple like a bruise the night had planted. He saw me and straightened the way a colt senses the corral gate and refuses it with his whole body. Mother, he said, not aloud, but with his stance, with the tilt of his jaw, with the way he put his feet on the earth. I wanted to burn the river dry and cross on my hands. Harpagus lifted a scroll and let words fall like measured grain. Cyrus offers peace through union. Tomyris, queen, become his queen. Your people will have roads, granaries, iron at cost, markets without tolls. Your riders will become his cavalry. Your banners will hang in his halls, or refuse, and your son will be treated as a prince of a conquered nation. Release him, I said, and the river put frost in my voice. Then we speak. Release is a word for friends, he replied. We are not yet that. My chiefs shifted in their saddles, bows in hand, the horses edging and blowing steam. The river held them like a tether. The night pressed its cold mouth to the back of my neck. Listen to me well, I said, and the wind helped carry the words. If you keep the boy, I will come for him. If you harm him, I will come for you. There is no tent you can sleep in that the wind cannot enter. There is no wall that hunger does not learn to climb. Our beggars did not flinch. If you will not take the hand offered, he said, then we will set a table you cannot resist. He meant the banquet that would come again, dressed in different meats, different songs. He meant honey in a wolf's mouth. I dismounted, knelt, and touched the river with my palm. It bit me to the bone. Oxes, I murmured, you have carried kings and beggars. Carry this promise. Carry it to the fish that nibble at the hems of tents, to the reeds that eavesdrop. I will make this water remember my son's name. When I rose, the Persians had already led him away. We made camp in a crescent along the bank fires, low tents, half raised, horses dozing with one ear pointed riverward. I did not sleep. I listened, steel on steel across the water, the shuffle of discipline, the long exhale of an army that believes itself inevitable. At gray dawn, frost draped the reeds like bridal veils. I sent 2 riders west, 2 north, 1 south, with words braided in his mind. Do not drink their wine. Do not sit beneath their shade. If sweetness touches your tongue, bite it until blood answers. To the camp I gave quiet work, fletching, stitching, the kind of order that keeps panic from inventing disasters. By noon, smoke rose from the far bank. In a straight line, a cooking fire, deliberate, perfumed with cinnamon and fat. Persian horns spoke across the water. A song that called not to warriors, but to tired men, to those whose mouths remembered salt more than victory. Hold, I had told my people, hold hunger by the throat. Toward evening, a strip of beach shone where the river had shaved itself thin. I saw, as if the day had turned its head to reveal a second face, the place to cross. We would not take it, not yet. I waited for night to ripen. When it was black enough to bruise the eye, I rose, took only 5, and moved along the bank until reeds held us in their needle-soft arms. Across the water, a tent glowed, not the king's, not the general's, a prison tent, the kind you use when you want to show mercy for profit. We waited, one by one, breath clenched, the river pressing its cold mouth over ours. Mid-stream, the current tried to turn my body into something the river owned. I denied it. I set my feet on a smooth I could not see, felt the knot in the flow, where a boulder told water how to behave, and used it as a hinge. We came up on the far side, stinking of iron and winter. I put my ear to the earth. Hollow, underneath, Men sleeping on planks, weapons stacked in tidy rows, the sound of someone's nightmares walking back and forth. I cut the tent wall where its shadow lay deepest. Inside, 3 prisoners, not my son, a guard with his mouth open to a dream, ropes, a jug, a bowl of meat, gone to grease. We freed the 3 and sealed their mouths with the promise of breath. The guard woke into the fact of my palm at his throat. "Where is the boy?" I asked. He spat a prayer and stared at my eyes, as if they were a second set of blades. "Moved," he croaked, "to the king's lines. For safety." Safety is a word like a coin, smooth and used by many hands, none of them clean. We left the way we had come, river carrying our heat away, until we were only edges. At dawn, I let myself weep one breath, two, and then I stopped. Tears are a ration. Spend them and you will be hungry later. I stood before my people as the sun showed itself like a pale scar. "They have my son," I said, "and so they have all our sons. We will answer, not with honey, not with sleep, with the old tongue, horse, arrow, patience, sky." I lifted my spear and felt the cold weight of the day draw down into my wrist like iron choosing where to live. "Break camp," I said. "We will give them a banquet of our own." They say the Persians laid out carpets on the gravel, that they set cups where even the wind could not knock them over. They say music walked the air on slippered feet, and the smell of roasted meat fattened the shadows. I did not go to sea. I had already learned what sweetness does to men who have been eating winter. The free riders who had escaped the first trick returned with eyes that refused to sit still. "We smelled figs," one said, shame darkening his face. "We thought, you thought they had learned our songs." I finished for him, not unkindly. The world is full of mouths that sing what they do not mean. We moved our camp inland, away from the river's soft lessons. I sent women to cut willow whips for snares, men to dig pits where the earth lay brittle, boys to ride the perimeter and sing to the herds, so that the horses would remember they belonged to our mouths, not to drums. When we slept like flint ready to spark. For 3 days, the Persians sent emissaries. For 3 nights, they set banquets. On the 4th morning, a runner came with his lungs torn by haste. "Your son," he gasped, broke his bonds, killed a guard with his chain. He tried to flee. They took him again. The boy swallowed the air like it had teeth. He asked to speak with you. To ask, he could not say it. What did he ask? I made my voice a road he could walk. He asked for death before dishonor, the boy whispered. They did not grant it. Something inside me turned to glass, clear, merciless, a surface on which truth had to stand barefoot. I sent for the shaman, old as frost and twice as stubborn. She came with her hair braided in ash, her palms stained black with herbs. In my tent where the air was warm enough to remember softness. I said, if there is a God who trades in fairness, I have a bargain. There is no such God, she said, and set the bowl of smoke between us. There is only witness. Ask instead for eyes to watch, for breath to go on after. I bowed to her cruelty. It was the kind that keeps you from drowning in sweetness. That night, the wind died. When wind dies on the steppe, you hear the world's bones. You hear the decisions men make when they think the air has stopped listening. Before dawn, Harpagus's horns spoke once, twice, measured, official. Then silence rolled over the river like a pelt laid down by a hunter. The first light touched the reeds and made them into knives. We formed in a shallow crescent, 30 riders ahead, archers to either side, the rest holding like a lung, waiting to expand. I wore no crown, only the wolf mantle and the silver band at my wrist. I tied a strip of horsehide around my spear. I told my mare a secret, and she flicked her ear as if she had decided to keep it. The Persians did not cross at the shallow. They crossed where the current curled, where a man with a map would think the river too proud for surprise. They came in rafts of leather. Men packed tight shields, roofing them from the sky. A good tactic against arrows, a poor tactic against water that does not care for order. I let them come. I let the river touch them with its indifferent mouth. When the first raft grounded and the second was nearly there, I raised my hand and the air around us stiffened. Now, I said, our arrows did not aim for men. They aimed for seams where leather was stitched, where knots did not quite believe in themselves. Rafts sighed, then sagged, then took water with the greed of earth after drought. Men shouted in accents the river did not bother to learn. Shields clanged like the inside of a bell. The second wave was clever. They broke formation and came in staggered lines. Archers braced at the prow, javelins ready to make bridges of our bodies. We eased back, not retreat but invitation. When their feet found our bank, we gave them ground that looked like ground and was not. They fell into the pits we had cut and hidden with meadow skin, not deep enough to kill, deep enough to disorder. And disorder is a god when your foe is an empire. Ride, I said, and we rode not a charge, a weave, in and out, horses bright with frost, braids snapping like bowstrings. We put arrows into knees and elbows, into the places where a man stops being a weapon and starts being a weight. We left the proud armor for later. Pride is patient. Joints are not. Harpagus himself held the center a good commander. Eyes that could read a field as if it were a lover's shoulder. He saw me, and he did not hesitate. We met, like the ends of a trap, clang for clang, his blade greeting my spear with the relieved fury of metal meeting its purpose. I feinted to his left. He cut low. I gave him sky and took his knuckles with the butt of my spear. He swore in a language that thought itself more beautiful than blood. Your king has what he wants, I said, breath steady. Why take more? Because taking is how the world stays one piece. He answered between blows. Then let it break, I said, and smashed the edge of my shield into his brow. He did not fall. Good men rarely do when we need them to. we split them, worried them, led them away from the tidy lines they had practiced under roofs. Then we let them follow us, panting, thirsty for a pursuit that felt like a story they understood. We led them into a seam of land, where the snow crusts just enough to lie, where hooves find purchase, and boots argue with ice. There we turned. There we were not breathless. There our horses remembered that they were made for this weather and this war. We broke them, not all, never all, but enough for the river to learn their names. When the sun was a tall coin at the lip of the world, a horn sounded from the Persian rear, not order, but calling, a sound that meant rally to the king. We let them. A man should have a last belief to run toward. We did not cross after them. We stacked their fallen in tidy rows and gave the river a drink of its own coin. Then we sent a runner with a strip of red cloth tied to his spear. Carry this, I told him, to the tent with the richest curtains. Say, your honey is bitter, your wine is sleep. Send me my son, or send me your head. Twilight gathered itself and pulled its cloak tight, leaving only a thin seam of light to stitch the day to the night. In that seam I saw a small boat push off from the far bank. No guards, one man. When he reached us, he raised empty hands and a face that had seen maps and laws not help. They had given me what I asked for, not the head, my son. He was upright, eyes open, breath moving like a hinge that needed oil. They had not broken his bones. They had not broken the part of him that could look at me and know my name without saying it. He stumbled when he stepped from the boat. I called him the weight of him, the heat, the history of him, and for the first time since winter had made itself. My tutor, I let sound out of my throat that was not a command. Mother, he said, and then, lower, for me alone, do not bargain. I already did, I answered. I bargained with the river. It agreed to remember you. He smiled the way a man smiles when someone he loves says something mad and holy. Then remember this too, he said, and pulled the short blade from the sleeve a careless guard had not searched. I moved too slow, horse quick in war, slow in grief, and the knife found the place under his ribs where breath lives. He slid to his knees, my hands too late to catch more than the last of him. The world made a sound like a rope breaking under too much weight. I pressed my forehead to his and felt the river inside him going where the river always goes. Forgive me, he whispered. There is nothing to forgive. I lied, because love is a good liar when it needs to be. He tried to give me back my own stillness. He died before he could finish the gift. The boatman looked away and the sky did not. The sky watched as if it had paid for the seat. I closed my son's eyes with 2 fingers that had held weapons all day and were suddenly too soft for this work. Around us, my people kept a ring, not a wall, a shelter. Their silence thicker than any hymn. When I stood, the glass inside me did not shatter. It became a blade. I sent another messenger, not a runner, a woman with a voice that could crack ice. She bore a strip of crimson soaked in the blood I could not afford to lose. To Cyrus, I said, tell him this. You trapped us with wine. You wrapped mercy in rope. You taught me the shape of your kindness. Now I will teach you the step. The woman nodded once, as if bowing to a god she had chosen herself, and set off into the dusk. We burned no fires that night. The cold did our thinking for us. I lay beside my son's body until it stiffened. Then I rose, washed my hands with snow, and called the council. No speeches, only plans. We would not meet him at the river again. We would draw him in, give him the ground he needed to believe in his map, and then remove the map. We would be winter. Not storm, not a spectacle, but a season that entered the bones and asked them to choose. I took the silver band from my wrist and bound it to my spear. I cut a lock of my hair and braided it into my mare's mane, so she would remember what we carried. I sang quietly, a child's song my mother had used to hush the wind. The wind did not hush. It listened. At dawn we rode. The day came pale and rimmed with frost, a sun without warmth, climbing through a sky of hammered silver. Snow whispered under the hoofs of 1,000 horses, and the wind wore Albanas like newscards. We rode in silence. No drums, no horns, only breath, leather, steel, the small litany that keeps fear from finding a mouth. Each rider carried a pouch of earth from home, so that if they fell, the ground beneath them would already know their name. Across the plain, the Persian host uncoiled like a serpent awakened from sleep. Their armor flashed dull gold, their ranks perfect in their cruelty. I saw standards lifted, high lions, suns, the stitched arrogance of empire. They looked like order. We looked like weather. I felt my mare tremble, not with fear, but with the ache to run. I leaned close to her ear. Not yet, daughter of storms, I whispered. Wait until the world exhales. Then I raised my spear, the silver band at its haft catching the wan light, and the step answered me. 1,000 hooves struck the earth together, not charge, not chaos, but heartbeat. The plain itself seemed to move, a tide of flesh and frost. Arrows rose from our ranks like a flock of blackbirds, and fell upon the Persians with the precision of hunger. Their shields caught the first storm, but for every arrow stopped, another found a seam, and the sound of metal kissing flesh became our hymn. Cyrus's lines bent and reformed, a dance of discipline I could almost admire. He rode at their center, bright in scale armor, his horse veiled in crimson silk. A king who believed beauty could frighten death. I rode to meet him. Snow lifted around us in ghostly veils. The world shrank until there was only the space between two riders. He was older than I expected. Eyes hard but not unkind. The eyes of a man who has mistaken conquest for creation. Queen of the wind, he called across the frost. Why must we feed the earth with what the gods already own? Because the gods do not ride with us, I said. They only watch to see who remembers them. He smiled, a weary curve, almost tender. Then he lowered his spear. So did I. The first clash was thunder muffled by snow. Horses reared, blades ran, breath turned to clouds of blood. Around us, the battle spread like fire, finding dry grass. Men vanished into the white, their cries brief, swallowed by the wind that loved no one. I struck at Cyrus's guard, felt bone yield beneath my spear, turned, blocked, struck again, time dissolved. There was only motion, the rhythm I had learned as a child chasing shadows across the plain. Once, through the blur, I saw my son's face, not as he had died, but as he had lived, laughing at the sky. I rode harder. Cyrus came for me then, his sword tracing a red arc through the snow. It caught my shoulder, tore leather, drew warmth. Pain bloomed, but did not slow me. I closed the space between us and drove my spear beneath his guard. It met resistance, then release, a sound like the wind sighing through reeds. His horse screamed. He slid to the ground, the silk of his cloak spreading over the snow like spilled sunset. The battle around us faltered. The empire's rhythm broke. Men looked to him and found him still. Some fled, some fell to their knees, uncertain which gesture the gods preferred. I dismounted. The world had gone strangely quiet. Only the ticking of cooling armor, only the whisper of snow landing on what would never rise again. Cyrus lay half-turned, his eyes open to a sky he had never tried to understand. I knelt beside him. For a moment, he was simply a man, breath fogging in slow disbelief. "Drink," I said softly, and lifted a small flask of water from my belt. He looked at it, then at me, and in his gaze I saw not hatred, but comprehension, the way a storm recognizes another storm. I poured the water into the snow. It darkened, melted, became the color of blood. "Now the earth will have what it came for," I whispered. His hand twitched once, then stilled. The wind rose, carrying the smell of iron and river toward the east. I stood and let the silence find me. Victory has no taste. It is only the absence of noise. Around me my people gathered, faces rimed with frost, eyes wide with the terrible calm that follows survival. We did not cheer. We only breathed, and that was enough. When night fell, we built no fires. The stars were fire enough. They burned above the plain, countless, indifferent, and I thought of my mother's words, that each star is a spirit who died free. I wondered if Cyrus now was one of them, if his light would join the others, a small, stubborn gleam in the endless cold. When the sun rose after the battle, it was pale and bewildered, as if it, too, could not believe what it had seen. Smoke wandered through the frost like lost spirits, and the river sang to itself in a low, broken tongue. The bodies of men and horses lay scattered across the plain, their armor glinting with the shy gold of morning. The earth had eaten well. We moved among them in silence. No triumph, no songs, only the small necessary acts, closing eyes, cutting ropes, whispering names into the wind, so the dead would not forget who they had been. The Persians, even in death, looked orderly. My people looked wild and alive, their hair tangled with blood and wind, their faces carved with awe. Some of them tried to smile when they saw me, but I could not return it. Victory had frozen inside my mouth. I walked until I found the place where Cyrus had fallen. His body had been lifted onto a shield, his cloak drawn over his chest. The snow beneath him had turned to pink slush, and his sword lay half buried, the hilt shaped like a sleeping lion. I knelt beside him, and the men around me drew back, their breath shallow, their eyes uncertain. They had seen me fight, but not weep. They feared the second more than the first. I looked at his face. It was calm, almost gentle, as if he had at last found the stillness he had chased across continents. There was no malice in it, only exhaustion. He had wanted to build an empire so wide that it could hold peace within its borders. But peace cannot be owned. It is a creature that comes and goes on its own feet, and will not stay where it is caged. I touched the edge of his cloak, and my hand came away damp with the memory of battle. For a long time, I said nothing. Then I spoke, softly, so that only the river and the wind could hear. Cyrus, son of Cambyses, king of kings, you came to take what could not be taken. You sought to marry the wind, but she is no bride. She is the mother of storms. The men shifted behind me, waiting for the command. They feared I might give to them. Vengeance was still warm to me. It was ash. Still, I remembered my vow. I had told him that if he destroyed my son, I would give him blood enough to drown in, and the gods, indifferent as they are, remembered my promise, even when I wanted to forget it. We lifted his body onto a high mound of earth. I ordered a bronze vessel filled with wine and water mixed, and when they brought it, I poured it into the ground beside him. The red seeped through the snow like a vein opening. Drink, I said to the empty air. Drink and learn what it is to thirst. It was not cruelty. It was justice of the old kind, the kind the sky itself respects, the kind that makes even gods avert their eyes. When it was done, I stood for a long while, watching the smoke of the fires drift upward, curling into shapes that could have been souls. The wind touched my hair, gentle now, as if it too had tired of war. I thought of my son, of the weight of his head on my shoulder when he slept as a child, of his laugh, sharp as flint, the way he would race the horses and never look back. The wind carried his name to me, then Spargapises, and for a heartbeat I almost believed he was near. But grief is a circle. You walk it again and again, and the only way out is to become its center. That night, I dreamed of the river. It was swollen and wild, its current bright with shards of starlight. Cyrus and my son stood on opposite banks, both looking toward me. Neither spoke, and I realized that the wind, their old companion, had taken their voices to keep them company. When I woke, the world was quiet. The snow had stopped. The sky was pale as bone. We burned no banners, claimed no trophies. We gathered what was ours and began the long ride home. Behind us, the plain sighed under its new burden of ghosts. As we rode, I felt something lift from my shoulders, not relief, but understanding. The empire was dead, but so, too, was the part of me that believed freedom could be won by a blade. Freedom is not a victory. It is a vow, renewed each morning when you rise and remember that you belong only to the sky. By the time we reached the heart of our land, spring was stirring in the frost. Grass pushed its green fingers through the snow, and the herds began to move again. The wind had changed its tone, less a roar, more a hum. It carried no blood now, only the scent of thawing earth and distant rain. I stood on a ridge and looked east. The horizon shimmered with light, and I thought of all the names the world would give me. Queen, widow, warrior, avenger. But none of them were mine. I was only what I had always been, a daughter of the endless sky. Years passed like migrating birds, living, returning, living again. Seasons folded over one another, until time itself became a skin stretched thin across the bones of memory. I grew old, though the wind never told me so. It still tangled my hair, still whispered secrets through the tents at night, still carried the laughter of children born long after my wars were dust. But when I looked into the river's mirrored skin, I saw my mother's face looking back, lined, calm, and full of sky. I no longer rode at the front of the hunts. My knees ached when I mounted my mare, and the bow that had once sung so easily in my hands now hummed a slower, sadder tune. Yet, when I rode, the steppe still greeted me as kin. The horses still turned their heads to follow, and the elders still nodded when I passed. A queen grows smaller in body but greater in shadow. The young came to my tent for counsel. They brought me bowls of milk and furs for my shoulders, and they sat cross-legged by the fire as I spoke of things older than their blood, of the way snow tells the future by how it falls, of the patience of rivers, of the price the world asks for every freedom we take. Sometimes, in the night, I would wake and listen to the silence. It had changed. When I was young, silence was a threat, the pause before a storm or an ambush. Now it was a comfort. It meant the land was breathing easily again. I visited the burial mound of my son each spring. Grass had grown thick over it, and wild flowers leaned toward his rest, as if drawn by his memory. I would kneel there, press my palms to the soil, and feel the pulse of the earth, steady, forgiving, endless. I no longer asked the gods why. The sky never owed us explanations. It only lent us moments. Sometimes travelers from the south came through our lands. Persian traders, Greek wanderers, strangers with eyes full of maps. They would ask to see the queen who had slain the great Cyrus. When they found me, an old woman wrapped in wool and smoke, they bowed too deeply, spoke too softly, as if afraid I might still command storms. I would smile and tell them stories, not of kings and wars, but of the wind, of the way the stars drift slower above the steppe, of how freedom feels like frost on your lips. And when they left, they carried away a legend, never guessing that they had spoken not to a myth, but to a woman who still missed her child's laughter more than any victory. In my final winter, the snow came early and did not leave. The fires burned lower each night, and I could see my breath even inside the tent. Yet, I was not cold. The cold had become my oldest companion, honest, enduring, familiar. I called for the shaman, the same woman who had once told me that there were no gods of fairness, only witnesses. She was bent like a willow now, her eyes milky with age but still sharp as flint in spirit. "Is it time?" she asked. "It is," I said. "Then rest. The wind will remember." I lay back and listened to the horses outside, their hooves shifting in the snow, their breath rising like ghosts toward the dawn. The tent's hide walls moved with the air, the same rhythm I had known since childhood, the same sound as my mother's heartbeat, the same breath that had carried every story ever told beneath this sky. As sleep crept over me, I thought of the river, of Cyrus's face fading into the water, of my son's laughter, of my husband's voice saying, "Live, my hawk, live fiercely." The last thing I felt was wind against my cheek, warm for the first time in many years, and I smiled because I knew it had come to guide me home. They say that when the wind rises over the Oxus, it carries a woman's voice, low, distant, and full of stories. They say she speaks of freedom and love, of grief and mercy, of how the sky remembers the names of those who dared to live without walls. The Persians called her barbarian, the Greeks called her savage, the steppe called her mother, and the wind, faithful as ever, still carries her laughter across the frost. If you listen tonight, wherever you are, open your window to the cold. Let the wind touch your face. You may hear her there, not as a queen or a warrior, but as a woman who lived and loved fiercely, and who learned that even empires turn to dust, but freedom is eternal. Thank you, my listener, for walking with me through the wind and silence of the ancient steppe, for standing beside the queen who defied an empire, and for listening until the stars themselves grew still. Tomyris' voice may have faded into legend, but the echo of her strength still moves in every breath of freedom, every quiet defiance of the soul. If her story touched your heart tonight, tell me, which queen, which forgotten woman of history would you like to meet next? Until then, rest beneath the vast, endless sky where the wind remembers all names, and peace waits like morning on the horizon.